like when you read back about Moses, like Moses murdered somebody, then led the Israelites out of Israel.
Yeah.
And it took a while for me to forgive him. I was more hurt at him just ghosting me, but then I put that against God. And it's like, no, God's a forgiving God, and he uses broken, fallen people to do good things in life.
Chris, you're a husband, you're a founder and CEO of Life Edge, man, and the host of the Life Edge podcast and so much more. Thank you for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Eric, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I like to kick the show off by going back a bit. Like, where did you grow up and what was childhood like for you?
I grew up at the time, it was kind of a small town in Gilbert, Arizona. And now it's not a small town, it's the suburbs of Phoenix. Um, Childhood for me was decent. Like, I didn't have a bad childhood. I had a really good family. Grew up going to church, had really good friends, went to school. There wasn't much like where you look back and think like, oh, I had all these struggles growing up, and I'm very blessed and very grateful for the childhood that I had. My parents struggled, but as kids, we didn't realize what was going on with some of the finances and stuff. I was out playing, I was going to church, I was doing mission trips, I was doing all kinds of different things. So for me, life growing up was decent until I decided to move away and go to school and that kind of thing.
Gotcha. I mean, and our good friend Tyler introduced us, and like you mentioned, you grew up going to church, and faith is such a big part of our lives and Tyler's lives and your life. Like, what was that moment for you? Like, growing up in church, you obviously had to make your own decision to step into your faith and relationship with Jesus. What was that moment for you that kind of prompted you to do that?
Yeah, so that's kind of a long story, and I'll try and make it as short as
Okay.
possible. But
Nope. No worries,
because
man.
when you grow up in church, especially when I was introduced as young as I was, and I've heard you mention this before on a recent podcast where you were asking somebody like, how do we raise second generation Christians?
Yeah.
And I grew up a second generation Christian. Now, my mom, at the time, I didn't realize these things, but when the church I grew up in started, my mom was there the second weekend they opened, right?
Wow.
And she was like, I've got to go to church. I've got to get these kids because I had brothers and sisters, and my dad was just off working constantly to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. And so I've been involved in the church since I could remember, right? And so initially when you start going to church, you don't have an option when you're a kid, right?
Right.
It's not like I can say, no, I'm going to stay home and play video games or play with my friends. And I grew up in the community was heavy in LDS, right? So Sundays they didn't really play. I couldn't go play with my friends anyways. So they were going to church. So I was going to church. We weren't going to the same church, but we were all going to church.
Yeah.
And I grew up. I started playing instruments. I got into the worship band in junior high and high school. And this is where the story kind of gets interesting as far as switching from my parents' faith to developing my own faith,
Yeah.
because I had mentors and people pouring into me. And then the more you get involved in church, you start to see like the politics of church, right?
Totally.
And as you get older, you're more aware of what's going on. And so as a high schooler playing in the worship band, I was living like this double life. It was really interesting. And so I was living this kid who's going to high school, who's on Thursday night and Friday night going out partying, but then Sunday still ending up in church. And I started to like devolve. There was these two people that I was being during the week. I was one person, and then on Saturday night and Sunday, I was another person. And for a while, I was able to manage the two and kind of manage what was going on. And then one of my mentors, and I'll try to keep this as vague as possible. One of my mentors in the church, higher up in the church, had an affair with somebody else in the church. And it was like, for whatever reason, that not for whatever reason. What ended up happening was the guy ghosted me after this all happened. And I was reaching out like, hey, what's going on? Why, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff happened, looking for some answers, trying to figure out like, hey, we're supposed to be these godly people. And here I was living a different life and dealing with this struggle in of myself. And then this happens. And now somebody who's been a mentor in my life for so long and was pouring into my life and I spent a lot of time and looked up to just was gone. And who was supposed to be this vision of God, this Christ-like man, and just he didn't want to repent for what had happened and was like, blah. And so that really sent me in this interesting path. And in the Bible, Christ talks about it's better to be cold or hot rather than lukewarm, right?
Yep.
And I was living a lukewarm life. I was living two lives. And so I turned 18. I'd been doing mission trips. I'd been doing all the things, but I still wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it to hold on to this persona I had developed as a person because everybody on Sunday saw me as this person. And I had to live up to that person. But the rest of the week, I was a different person. And so when I went off to school, I was like, I'm making a decision. I'm either going to be hot or cold, but I'm not going to keep walking in the middle here.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I was like, I'm not going to keep doing this faith thing. And I moved from Phoenix, Arizona to Sacramento to go to school, and the school set me up with a roommate, and my roommate was dealing drugs and these parties that all of a sudden started happening where it was like, even compared to what I was used to, this was like a whole new world of just debauchery, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so luckily that was a very short program. I'm a welder by trade. I learned how to build custom cars, and that kind of set me on a path for a few years where I was just kind of living life. Like it wasn't I had morals and there were still things I wasn't going to do, but I wasn't like, you know what, I'm out here following God and I'm living my best life.
Yeah.
That was definitely not the case. And so what ended up happening was after a few years of working and just being unsatisfied in work and life, I ended up moving back to Arizona and I met someone. And she was just coming off this big breakup and she had been in and out of church growing up. And I was like, man, I really like this girl. But if I want to keep her, I've got to change my act. And so I called up my youth pastor and I was who mentored me a lot growing up. And I was like, hey, I need you to meet with me like right now. He's like, when can you meet? I'm like, 5 a.m. on Wednesdays. And he's like, all right, we'll make 5 a.m. on Wednesdays. And so once a week for 10 years,
Wow.
he met me 5 a.m. on Wednesdays. And it was, there was no judgment. He was like, hey, I loved you then, and I still love you now. He ended up being the one who married my wife and I, who was that girl that I had sought him out after. And it was from there, it wasn't like an immediate thing. It was a slow move towards, I've got to get my act together. And it was just kind of closer and closer being drawn to the man I am today. So,
Man, I love that journey though that you were on. And gosh, what a cool thing that God just kept you on the path that, and even when I think we don't feel like God's in our life, I certainly felt that way a lot of times, even though God had been protecting me and leading me in the direction that I am in today. Man, just living life like you said, and even seeking out mentors of the church when I first started going back to church, and some of them turned out to like give me this knowledge and wisdom, and then they would go off and they cheated on their wife, and I'm like, seriously, like I ran into a similar situation that you had where that mentor was someone that spoke into my life, and then he ended up cheating on his wife, and it was just like, what is happening right now? Just so crazy about that, man.
yeah. And
Oh, go ahead, please.
no, I was just going to say it took a while for me to realize that even like when you read back about Moses, like Moses murdered somebody, then led the Israelites out of Israel.
Yeah.
And it took a while for me to forgive him. I was more hurt at him just ghosting me, but then I put that against God. And it's like, no, God's a forgiving God, and he uses broken, fallen people to do good things in life. And
Yeah.
that took me a long time to understand. And I still even struggle to this day to realize, like, we're all human, we're all faulty, give everybody grace.
Right. Oh man. Yeah, so good. As an adult and being a husband and an entrepreneur, like how do you balance your relationship with Jesus and then balancing like, hey, I need to be a good husband and I need to step into my entrepreneurial role and stuff like that. How do you do that? How do you balance that?
Well, I'm terrible at it. So
Okay.
the answer is it ebbs and flows. There's seasons and there's signs.
Mhm.
And so I get to a place where there's times when I'm like, you know what, I'm on fire for God. I'm connecting with the right people. I'm doing the things I need to be doing. I've got my morning ritual set up to where I'm journaling and spending time, and then something happens, right? The
Yeah.
business, there's some meetings that come up, or and right now it's real stressful. It's interesting. It's an interesting time right now for this podcast because we're starting up a new business for my wife. We have the Life Edge that we're running, and then my wife's working full time, pouring into the podcast. There's just been a lot kind of going on,
Yeah.
and it became it what I do is I just like try and be aware of the red flags of I move too far into one boundary or the other. And so I try to stay as disciplined as I can to a routine. But again, going back to we're all human.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm perfect and that I have my time with God every day. Sometimes it's in the evening right before I go to bed because I didn't get to have it in the morning. And
Mhm.
then being aware of like, hey, 5 days this week, I've missed my morning ritual.
Mm.
Something's out of balance.
Yeah.
Let's check in. Let's see what's going on. And it's always this ebb and flow of trying to be self-aware, and
Mhm.
it's difficult. But I noticed if things start going awry in my business or my relationship starts getting stressed with my wife and we're not communicating properly, it all ties back to me finding my foundation and my faith.
Man, it's so important as the husband to find that foundation when life gets crazy.
Mhm.
Man, is your wife's business up and running? Like, do you want to like what is that business, we don't have to talk about it? But I thought, hey,
Yeah,
let's
no,
promote it
no.
if it's up.
She's a dental hygienist,
Okay,
and she's going to be doing myofunctional therapy virtually. By
okay,
the time this podcast airs, the business will be live. It's actually going live in the next few days. But
nice.
essentially, helping people who have TMJ issues, tongue ties, and she's actually been working on me. I've been her first case study, which I didn't realize. Like I've spent the last 37 years of my life in a state of mild hypoxia because I couldn't breathe through my nose. And she's been able to help fix breathing through my nose and a lot of different things. And yeah, so like snoring, sleeping, all that kind of stuff, or sleep apnea. Sorry, that's probably the first place a lot of people want to start.
Yep.
And it really, yeah, it's amazing. It's called Honest Myo. Honestmyo.com would be the website.
Cool. Okay.
And
Well, I'll be.
thank you for
Yeah.
that plug.
Oh, absolutely, man. I'll put a link down in the show notes as well, man. I love that. And I want to talk about Life Edge too, because this is so rad and it's definitely needed. Like, for those who don't know, what is Life Edge? Who's this for? How did this all come together?
Yeah. So again, another story I'll try and condense here.
Oh, all good, man. Yeah.
Life Edge is a platform where we vet out online courses and coaches. And so we're looking right now, our target demographic is really people who are deep into personal development and entrepreneurship between the ages of 18 and 35. That's really the demographic we're targeting right now. And we cover everything from business to life, or excuse me, business to health to spiritual to mental, you name it. We have fitness programs. We have, if you want, maybe you have a hobby like beach volleyball or poker, it doesn't matter. We kind of cover the gambit. And essentially what we're doing is finding the people who offer the best, the highest quality education in whatever field industry. We're vetting them out to make sure they are who they say they are. The program that they're offering is what they say it is, and that there's value in what's being sold, right? Because everybody's looking for education, but everybody else is also looking to make a quick buck.
Yeah.
And so now you have, excuse me, you have these programs like AI where it's like punch in a 5 prompt chat and we'll build an entire online course for you.
Right.
well, that doesn't do anybody any good. We want people who have experience, who have been in the trenches, have done the things that are educating people properly. And so the Life Edge came about when I decided that it was time for me to make a transition in my life. I was, like I said before, I was a welder by trade. I got into a manufacturing company. I worked there 10 plus years. And when I was the first welder that was hired on, and then I was able to grow through the company, became a multi-million-dollar company, fantastic company.
Wow.
Bulletproof Diesel is the name of the company. Great people, great owners. But as I was growing in my faith, I also realized that I was not living to my full potential, that I was called to do more, that I was called to serve others. And this goes back to like a lot of the mission work I did growing up. We traveled to Mexico, Ecuador, South Africa, and I was doing work that was helping people essentially, right? I'm creating these components for these trucks, and people are fixing their vehicles. They're able to drive them around, do their jobs. But I wanted to leave an impact. I wanted to help change the world. And so I was kind of confused at the time when I was leaving, because I had spent like 15 years doing this thing. I'd gone to school for this thing, and now I'm like, well, I don't want to spend the next 30 years doing this. I've got to do something that's important. And I know that I like my entire life, I'm like, I've always had this thing in the back, like, you're called to do something special. And I got to help build this business, but that was just the stepping stone and gave me the path, but also the knowledge, right? Because I learned so much about business growing, helping grow a small business. I learned right
Sure.
things to do, wrong things to do, um, the approach, how to be fast, quick, all these different things. And so when I made that transition, I was like, I got to leave, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a degree that was transferable. I was trying to get hired at a whole bunch of different places that are all like, you got to go back to school. I'm like, all right,
Mm.
I'll go back to school. So I sign up for night classes. I'm doing the whole college thing again at 30 years old. And I find myself teaching one of my calculus classes because the professor just couldn't teach. And I
Mm.
was like, there's got to be a better way. Like, I'm going to spend the next 4 or 5, 6 years just to end up in the exact same place I was with creating no impact, no change. And so I started searching, and I found online courses, online education. And so I purchased one. And I spent like, I don't know, it was like 10 grand, spent a lot of money on this online course. Now I ended up learning some stuff. I made some money. It worked out. But then in the process, I bought another course that was like 2,500 bucks. And I learned more in that $2,500 course than I did in the $10,000 course.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, it's kind of the Wild West. There's
Sure.
nobody out there saying like, this is a good course, this is a bad course. It was kind of like automobiles back in the 60s. Everyone said they had the best automobile, and then JD Power and Associates came around and said, no, we're going to figure it out. Who is the best?
Yeah.
And that's essentially the path that we're following, is we want to help people know that if you're purchasing we wanted to clean up the Wild West essentially. And if you're saying that you have this course, this coaching program, and you're changing lives, we want to prove it so that everyone else that comes to you knows that they're actually getting what it is that you're offering.
Mm. Man, that's so good and so needed. I know I've wasted so much money on buying courses thinking, oh man, this is going to be the next big thing. I've got to jump into this. And then I go, well, crap, that didn't work out, or I didn't learn anything, or I already knew that stuff, man. I did,
Yeah.
when you're putting coaches and courses together, like how do you pick the courses and the coaches that you list on your website?
Yeah, so we've developed a process of how we vet everybody out. We start with just an initial check, right? There's always a cringe factor when you go to somebody's content, somebody's website, and especially I've been in this now for a lot of years. Very rarely do I look at somebody's website and go, ooh, I know this one isn't going to work out, or just how they're producing content or what's going on. And now I'm proven wrong. Now I'll still do my due diligence and dive in the way that we need to. So you first kind of just go with a vibe check. Do they have a decent website? Is their content quality? Is what they're saying actually accurate? Because a lot of times you can just do a quick Google check on some of the content people are putting out, and you're like, well, no, they don't know what they're talking about, so
Yeah.
I can't quantify them as an expert when they can't even do a quick Google check on what they're saying, right? And so you kind of balance some of that out, and it gets a little nuanced when it's how do you flip a flip a house in real estate, or how do you do seller financing? It gets a little bit more nuanced. So then we
Sure.
dive into a bit more of a detailed background check. Do you have the credentials that you say you do? Have you actually done the things you say you've done? If you've bought and sold $100 million worth of real estate, well, prove it. Let's see where that's at. Let's see what's going. And we do this to the best of our abilities.
Sure.
There's times when you just have to, you get as much information as you can, and you're like, yeah, this is pretty accurate, or no, this is not worth vetting, and
Mhm.
it's not worth. And so we would rather err on the side of quality rather than quantity and any kind of like that. Then we're going to do a reputation check. We're going to see what kind of reviews are out there. What are they mostly positive? What are the negative reviews? And if we can, we try and reach out to the people who've left negative reviews, because sometimes what you'll find is like someone's like, oh, this course was a scam. This was worthless. But then come to find out, it's like, well, you bought the course, but you never went through it. So
Right.
how can you determine whether something's a scam or not when you never put the content, the information? First, you never listened to it, and then B, you never used it. So
Mhm.
from there, we dive into the reviews, and then as often as we can, we get access to the courses. Now, a lot of times we can get access for free. Sometimes we just purchase the course ourselves, depending on if it's cost effective or not. And we'll go through the actual course. We're slowly creating more content on our YouTube channel where you can see us walking through the courses, showing what they offer. And then from there, we just continue to engage the users and user feedback as far as, hey, what was your benefit from this course? And on our email list, we're reaching out to people saying, if you've taken a course, please send us an email with your review. What did you like? What did you not like? Rate it on a scale 1 to 10, that kind of thing. And we take all that and compile that into a score, which will eventually be listed on the website, and we'll start ranking things. We're just not there yet.
Man, I love that. And you guys have such a cool site. And I used to do some design work in websites. So I too, when I go to a website, I'm like, the vibe check, right? Like, oh, is this a good website? And I'll judge it right away. And I
Yeah.
get like, sometimes you got to deep dive, but for me, I'm like, okay, the website's got to look good for me to even
Yep.
think about going this route. But you guys have a legitimate, awesome website. And you guys list a lot of courses of folks that have actually been on my show, from Martha Craigie,
Mm.
to Subtle Skills, like tons of awesome people on your website. So definitely listeners need to go out and check out the Life Edge website there. I love talking to other podcasters, and you've got this podcast, the Life Edge podcast. I've been doing it since 2017. You've released a little over 40 episodes, I believe, is what I was looking at
Mm.
there. Why did you decide to start the podcast, and how has it helped you in your business?
Yeah, so honestly, the podcast was like my own kind of guilty pleasure. I
Okay.
love talking to people. I love learning. So part of
Yeah.
my transformation, when I was like, you know what, I got to get out of this welding thing, was I finally picked up a book and I started reading. And I was like, oh my gosh, there is so much awesome information in books.
Yeah.
And then a book is just someone's story. But there's questions sometimes I have when I'm reading a book. And I was like, man, if I start a podcast, I get to help promote what these people are doing, right? I'll just interview the people on our platform. But then I also get to ask some of my own personal questions and hopefully have an engaging conversation. So initially, it started out as just, I want to have some really cool conversations with some really cool people. And then
Yeah.
it slowly evolved from, now not only can I have a good conversation, but can I have a good conversation that provides value to other people and creates impact? And now when I get a text message, I had a podcast drop a couple of weeks ago, and I got a text from several people that were like, "Wow, I'm rethinking a lot of things about my business after listening to that. I didn't know about this. I didn't know about that. I need to replan my future. I've been working in the wrong direction." And it's that, to me, is now the like, how do I create more of that? How do I,
Mhm.
because the Life Edge is about helping people learn, grow, and succeed. Well, the podcast should be the same thing. We want
Yeah.
people to find the life edge. We want people to find their edge in life or enhance their edge in life through online courses and online education. And so the podcast now marries perfectly with what our mission is for the website.
Come on. I love that you also mentioned, like, when you first started, like, your interviews were like the awkward first dates, because that's what it's so true, man. That's so true. I mean, when I started, I was in a walk-in closet, had a 100-foot extension cord that ran around the bed into the closet, and I didn't have a microphone and, wasn't even looking to the camera. It was bad lighting, and it was like, okay, now what are we gonna talk about? When I when I first started, I was talking with MMA fighters, so I was asking them like, why the heck do you want to get in a cage and get punched in the face? And it was like this awkward sort of like conversation, but
Yeah, and
so good.
you're just terrible at having a conversation, right? You just
Yeah,
don't know how to ask people
totally.
questions. Your follow-ups are like, okay, next question. And
Yeah,
it just you got to work through a lot of those things, the growing pains of having a podcast. So yeah, no, I get it.
totally. Oh, well, I know that we're coming up on time. I want to ask one final question. I ask all my guests. I'm a big music guy. You were in the worship band there, but like, what kind of music do you listen to now? Like, do you have a favorite band that you like to listen to?
Oh, I knew this question was coming, and I was like, man, how am I going to answer this? Because I am so mood dependent on what I listen to.
True. Yeah.
I love so much music. So growing up, my mom was a music fanatic, and I
Okay.
have just been versed in a lot of music. So it, I would say it's more genre based, dependent on the mood. But if I had a go to, and this is going to sound dumb, my wife makes fun of me so much, but it's kind of like I guess you could classify it as like a boy band punkish.
Okay.
So like Fallout Boy, Panic
Yeah.
at the Disco, The Starting Line, just kind of that more upbeaty kind of. That was when I was going through middle school. The Blink 182 was kind of still in, Green Day, that kind of genre is
Yeah.
like my go-to. But I really like if you put my iPod or my Pandora or Spotify on shuffle, like that constantly catches people off guard of like, what the heck am I listening to right now?
Uh, man, I love that because that's my era as well. Fall Out Boy, Blink 182, Panic at the Disco, like that's my jam. I mean, I love that era. I got to work for Universal Records for a year way back
Mm,
in the day, and it was absolutely awesome. And one of my favorite bands is Thursday, like that type of
yep.
emo sort of scene. That was my go-to for sure. But
AFI, the Ataris, well, I could keep
right?
going, but it's so interesting because I'll put on shuffle and forget that I've had my music on shuffle, and the wife will get in the car and it'll be like Elvis to Taylor Swift to Eminem to
Yeah.
Tool to Wesley Willis to AFI. Like it jumps around so much that it's to the theme song from Happy Days, like just
Yeah.
random stuff.
I love it, dude. So good. Chris, you're an absolute world changer, man. I appreciate you taking time and sharing your story. And I love what you guys got going on with the Life Edge and really excited about your wife's business, man. I'll be sure to put a link down in the notes as well. Man, congratulations on that. But thank you for taking time out of your day, man, and just sharing your story, man. I appreciate you.
No, I thank you for having me on. It's been fantastic.
Hey, if you've ever thought about starting a podcast but unsure where to go, you need to go check out ericalanmedia.com. Click on the resources tab there. I will walk you through how to start, launch, and run a podcast. I've recorded over 500 interviews since 2017, and I want to help you launch your podcast. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button so you catch every show when I drop them. Thanks again. Keep changing the world.